of high school. Anyway, she quit going to school and she helped on the farm.
Your mom?
Yeah, she helped on the farm with the animals and everything, and she always liked doing that kind of work. And and her sister helped my grandmother in the house. She wasn't an outdoor person. And then this man up in Presque Isle, Herbert Ryder, used to come down there. And I said to my mother, why did he come down there? His friend was dead. She said, oh, he knew the family. That's what I got for an answer. He knew the family. They never went up to his house, but he came down there. And he was quite a bit older than the girls, a lot older than the girls. Well, you know how girls can be, hanging on to men. Well, it ended up that my mother got pregnant. Now, I didn't never know that until I was about 18 before anyone told me I was adopted. I knew I'd been adopted, but the family didn't know I knew it. Anyway,
And so your real dad's name was what?
Herbert Ryder.
Herbert Ryder. And he's buried in Aroostook County?
He's buried up in Presque Isle.
Presque Isle, okay.
So, what he married my, I don't know what they told Grammy, because back then, if you had a child that was getting married before they were 18, you had to sign papers. So they must have told Grammy that they were pregnant. Here he was, 38 years old, marrying my aunt. Well, she took care of him until he died. And then she was always cutting seed potatoes, because they had a big potato farm. And she had a lot of, his children were all older than her. And then...
So he was already married?
He'd been married.
He'd been
married. These kids. I have a picture of her. And I don't know what the big secret was, but if I ever asked questions, and I did ask questions, they would find something else to do right away. And they couldn't take time to answer my questions. I would have loved to have some answers.
Mm-hmm.
Well, after Herb died, there was Auntie. Auntie was bright enough to go to school.
And what was her name?
The neighbors all said, you can't go to school. You couldn't learn like that.
What was your aunt's name?
Aunt Hildreth.
Hildreth.
And she went to school, and she graduated, and she got all the requirements to be a nurse. And she packed up her bags, and she moved to Connecticut and got a job in the hospital down there. And she lived there for years.
So why did he marry Aunt Hildreth instead of your mom?
Well, you tell me, and we both know.
Oh, okay.
I don't know. That was not to be talked about. One time when I was 16, my Grammy had an old trunk, and it was full of treasures. And you would never to get in that old trunk. But one time when my mother wasn't around, Grammy showed us most everything that was in the trunk. Not everything, but most everything.
Grammy Dibble?
Yeah. But we were satisfied with what she showed us, and there was a lot of nice treasures in that trunk. Well, when I was 16 and we had moved to another house, they put the trunk in the back. There was a set of stairs going upstairs. Then there was a wide space down there, and they pushed the trunk into the back of it. Well, everyone was in the kitchen, and I just had a feeling to go look in that trunk. It was like the spirit told me to go look in the trunk. So I went and looked in the trunk, and I found this round tube. I took it out. My mother would have died if she'd known that. And I pulled out the certificate in it. And it told when my mother and father were married. That's when I knew I had been adopted. And I thought, gee, this should be in a frame and hung on the wall. It wasn't my father's fault my mother got pregnant and had me. So anyway, I put the stuff back, and I went out in the kitchen, and I asked a couple of questions, but I didn't dare to ask too many. And nothing was ever said about it. But then I knew why my father treated me the way he did. Now, everything was fine until after I turned 12, and then after that he was very hard on me. He didn't even want me to iron my clothes because it was taking electricity. It was hateful things he did. And I've forgiven him for all that.
So did you ever get to spend a lot of time with any of the Ryder side of the family?
No, but I wore clothes that come from them. There was a man named Earl, and when his daughter outgrew her clothes, and they were beautiful clothes, they sent them down for Priscilla to have.
That was nice.
And anyway, then it came along. I was old enough to date. Nothing was said about who I was dating until I dated Fred. And then the war began. My father blew a stack. He didn't want Fred to ever come to the house. He didn't want him to be anywhere near me. Well, I didn't listen to him. I was like your kids. I didn't listen. And he lived about a half a mile up the road. And I would stop in and see him. And sometimes he'd come down to the house. And my father didn't realize that he was coming to see me, not him. And Fred, everybody liked Fred. You couldn't help but like Fred. And then we got married and told my parents we got married last night. Fred told them. And he gave me a big kiss. Fred was always kissing somebody. And my father never said a word, and he was always so good to us after that. Never said a word when Fred told him we got married. I guess he was glad that he wasn't going to have to raise a child. Anyway, things worked out, and then, of course, my Grammy had died. She lived with us. She had no place else to live.
Grammy Dibble?
Grammy Dibble. She had no place else to live because...
She lived with who? Your mom and dad, or with you and Grandpa?
What?
Who did she live with? You and Grandpa, or are you talking about when you lived with your parents?
When I was about 12 or 13, that's when she moved in with us because she couldn't work anymore. She was too old.
Oh.
And
where is she buried?
She's buried up there.
Kenduskeag?
Where Kaylee and your father pulled all the junk off the grave.
Okay.
And then it came along, and Dad and I got married. And it wasn't always an easy marriage, but I sure wouldn't have wanted to have anybody else. Grandpa was my guy. He's the one who named Daniel. I didn't want to name him Daniel. He came down the stairs one morning very early, and he said, "We'll name the baby Daniel Carter." Oh, okay. And then we had a name picked out for Stephen, who was going to call him something. I don't remember what it was now. What was he going to call him? Well, anyway, in about 3 days in the hospital, we figured out what we wanted to name him. Hazel wanted us to name him Joseph. No way, I didn't want a Joseph Smith. And I had another name picked out. And my friend said, "You can't name him that. That's what I'm naming my next child." What? And his voice said to me, "Don't worry about it. She's not going to ever have any more boys." And she never did. Never had any more boys. And we named him Stephen Allen. We picked out several names, but Stephen Allen, I'm glad we named him that. That was a good name for him. And he had curly hair, beautiful curly hair. And Raymond couldn't leave him alone. He wanted to comb his hair all the time. And Stephen would hide all the combs and the brushes, so Raymond couldn't do it. Stephen has had 3 or 4 operations coming up. Sometimes the Lord takes a child away so he doesn't have to go through those operations.
What kind of operations was he going to have?
Well, he had a hernia. It came up in the morning when I'd bend him on my knee and change his diaper. His hernia would pop out. I'd take him to the hospital, or to the doctor or somebody, and they couldn't find anything. But it would pop out when I changed his morning diaper. And then he had his eyes needed to have the lids shortened. And then he had to have his tonsils and adenoids out. The doctor had already said You bring that baby in here in the fall, and I'm taking his tonsils and adenoids out, okay? And what other operation did you have to have? I don't know. And then they were having the measles shots in Hamden. And Dad dropped us off so I could take him and Danny into the school where they had given the shots. And Danny was as good as gold. Stephen was crying his eyes out. Like, what am I here for? He was screaming. And I thought they're not going to give him any shot. His temperature was getting really high from all his screaming and putting on. And it came my turn to go down. Daniel went down very good at his shot. And Stephen was screaming, and they gave him a shot anyway. And he went home with a shot. And he was some unhappy boy. There was no need of him putting on such a tantrum. And Stephen was a runaway kid. He was always running away. We spent a lot of time hunting for him. One time, he sat in the middle of the road. Grandpa was supposed to be watching him. He'd gone over to the garage and forgot all about Stephen. So Stephen went out and sat in the middle of the road. This lady brought him into the house and told me he was sitting in the middle of the road. It was like he wanted to die, that he knew in his little heart that he was supposed to die. Well, it didn't happen that way. When we went down to our friend's place and staying for a week at the camp, we had to set up our tent. And Stephen, I showed him the day before he died, I showed him, if you keep kicking on this wharf, like you like to do, you're going to fall off and you're going to drown. And they pulled him off way over his head, and he was petrified. He's having his head wet. Oh dear. He went down and tried it again the next day, and he fell off and drowned. And we looked everywhere for him, and the only one that could find him was Ronnie. Ronnie found him, and if Raymond had found him, he wouldn't have lived through it. And Ronnie didn't have that feeling about death that everybody has. So our baby was gone, and it was so hard. And nobody wanted to talk about it. And when you have a baby that drowned, you want people to talk about it. You want people to talk to you so you can get it off your... About a year later, I got a doctor's appointment with Dr. Bajan. And I didn't know that he knew. He lived up the road, but I didn't know he knew anything about the baby. Of course people knew about it, but I didn't know he knew about it. And all the time I was there, he talked about Stephen. It was like somebody lifted a burden off me. And the other doctor that was in there, his little boy and Daniel were playing together. And he planted a lot of corn, because his father was very strict. They had to do something to earn their living.
Mm-hmm.
And I was finishing Peggy's dress that she had to wear at the graduation of the 8th grade. And I said, and this big storm came up. And I said, where's Daniel? Where's Daniel? And I couldn't run and get him. I didn't think I could. And thank goodness Daniel came home. The other little boy went and sat under a tree, and the lightning hit the piece of metal and went down and killed him. It was so wonderful that Danny came home, and I wish that little boy had gone home too. And his brother was graduating from high school. It was such a mess.
I'm glad Dad came home.
And so am I. He needed to grow up.
You didn't need to lose 2 little boys.
Wow. We had many things happen that was so sad when that little boy died. Anyway, the Dibbles had a fire when I was 5 years old. And I was in school, and on the way home from school, this lady that was our neighbor stopped the bus, and she took me off the bus and took me to her house. So I wasn't around seeing the fire or anything, and I never saw any of my toys again or anything. and nobody ever talked to me about it. I guess they thought that would be wrong to talk about it, but it wasn't wrong.
Which Dibbles?
No, Grammy Dibble.
Grammy Dibble's house burned down?
Yeah, that's why Grammy had no place to go when.
And that's why she came to live with you?
Yeah.
What started the fire?
It was a chimney fire.
Oh, a chimney fire.
It was in the spring. I don't know why they had the fire going. And they saved an awful lot of stuff, but they had an awful lot of stuff that didn't get saved.
Well, fire sure impacted your lives a whole lot, huh? And then the island, half of that burned down in 1947, and so Grandpa couldn't go back to his home for a while after he got out of the army, huh?
What are you talking about?
The fire down on the island.
Oh, Granby Smith?
Yep.
It was down there, and it didn't come near their house, but everybody had to move out and go someplace, so they stayed with their daughter Marion. And in the morning, he had to drive down to his house to feed his animals, because he had a lot of chickens, and I don't know what else he had for animals. I know he had a lot of chickens. He had to go down and feed them, and as it was, he could have stayed there, but they made everyone move out.
At Northeast Harbor?
Yeah.
Because Bar Harbor burned up?
Yeah, a lot of it did. Didn't go near Grampy's house.
And what about Grandpa? Did he get to go back in there?
Grandpa Fred?
Yep.
Grandpa Fred was in the army. He asked to come home to help fight the fire. No, it's not close enough, do you? They wouldn't let him come home. And when his other grandfather, Grampy Brown, died, they wouldn't let him come home to the funeral. And he loved his grandfather. Not everybody loved him, but Grandpa did. And he learned about sanding. Oh, heavens, you never want to give him something to sand. Grandpa something to sand. He sanded forever and ever and ever, and it drives you crazy. And Raymond had the audacity to sell that table that Grandpa did so much sanding on and making it beautiful. I wasn't very happy about that. Of course, it was Raymond's table to do with what he wanted to, but Grandpa had sanded that. Wow. And the Dibbles are buried up there, Grampy. And William died. He went to it when he got sick. William was the old fella. When he got sick, he went to live with his daughter. And I remember going over there to see him. And he looked so thin and so pale, and he was sitting out by the stove. And I didn't dare to go up and give him a hug or anything, because people didn't hug it back in those days. He was my Grampy, and I can remember being there. I wasn't quite 5. And I had to go to the bathroom. Of course, I never went anywhere but when I had to go to the bathroom. So they asked the older girl to take me out to the bathroom. Okay, I got out there and I was petrified. The holes are so big in this old back house that I thought I was surely going to fall in. And I didn't.
Well, I'm glad you didn't fall in, Nana.
No, I was so scared. Why'd they have the hole so big for children? And then we got in the house, and she made a peanut butter sandwich for her little brother. And that's when I started wishing I had an older sibling that would make a peanut butter sandwich for me. Annoying. Okay? And I don't know what happened or anything. No one would ever tell you nothing when you ask questions. It wasn't that something happened when my grandfather died, and my grandmother, Maud, lived on the farm, and it was all right for her to live on the farm. But when they sold it, they never offered any money to the other kids. That was their farm too. And never again, ever, did they ever associate with those people. And I don't know why. I think that was really mean. And they should have divided the money up and gave some to them. It was their father's farm. I don't know. It's just sad when you keep secrets and don't tell people. People need to know these secrets so that they can. When I asked Aunt Hilda things when we was up there one time, she said, "Oh, I gotta go to the bathroom." So when she came out of the bathroom, all nice and sat down, I asked her the questions again. I gotta go to the bathroom. She didn't have to go to the bathroom. She'd just been there. They just didn't want to tell me things. And so they think, I know they didn't think that I knew that Herbert Ryder was my father. And that doesn't bother me. It doesn't bother me a bit. Things happen. I wasn't very bright, but I got through life, and I met a nice guy. And it was a funny thing when the day about Grandpa. Grandpa pinched my arm about here. He had taken somehow or other. I knew he was going to town that day, and I needed some stuff up there. And I wasn't thinking of anything about riding up with him. And my mother came along, and my sister Joyce. And I crawled in the truck, and on the way home, he stopped for gas, and there was no gas because the electricity was off. He said, "I'm going to wait and it's turned back on." Okay, so my mother and Joyce got out and then went up to visit my aunt. And on the way back, Fred pinched my arm really hard, right there. I can still feel it. And I got the shock went all through my body. And then Fred said, he didn't tell me this till later in life. He said, "I got a shock too." That's when he said he knew that he was going to marry me.
Well, why did he pinch you?
How do you what?
Why did he pinch you?
I don't know. It just inspired him to do pinch me. I guess maybe that's what men did back then. I don't know. Wow. Well, let's go downstairs and play a game.
Okay, Nana.